Hello and welcome to the How to Thrive podcast. This podcast is hosted by me, Claire Sanders, and my sister and co-founder, Helen Silver-McMahon. Together, we are on a mission to empower individuals and teams with the human skills they need to thrive, maximising performance, minimising risk, and optimising well-being. If you'd like to find out more about how we can help your practice, please get in touch via our website, www.being-human.co.uk. I'd like to take a moment to say a huge thank you to our sponsors for the How to Thrive podcast, Flank. Flank is your in-house legal team's first AI colleague. Flank introduces AI native agents who are designed to integrate seamlessly into your existing systems, empowering legal teams like yours to work smarter. They instantly resolve commercial team requests, eliminate bottlenecks, and enable your legal team to operate at the speed the business needs. But this is just the beginning. At Flank, they firmly believe that the future isn't simply about better software. It's about building towards a future where fully autonomous AI colleagues will own entire workflows end to end, deeply embedded into your tools and systems. This is the new generation agentic engine that's redefining what's possible for in-house legal. If you'd like to find out more about Flank, have a look at getflank.ai. And if you get in touch with them, please do mention How to Thrive, so that they know that it came from one of our wonderful listeners.
We are taught we have to be right. We think that the endorphin hit of winning an argument is the same as having done the right thing.
Morning, Helen.
Morning, you're right.
Yeah, I'm all right, thanks very much. Oh, I started that one a bit different, did you notice? Trying something revolutionary, like a new greeting.
Wild.
Yeah, I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm enjoying, I've been very busy the last couple of weeks, flying all over the place, and I'm really enjoying the fact that this week and last week actually have been at home, and I'll be able to put some energy towards some other stuff like my research and some exciting projects that I'm working on. So a bit more proactive than reactive, which is always a nice place to be.
It's what we like, and the sun's shining, which is lovely. I was at the coast at the weekend, which was a beautiful last-minute trip to the coast, but so restorative. I just really needed it. You know, when you don't even realise I did realise I needed it, but then I really needed it. But I'm feeling tip-top today. And I've just had a meeting with my accountants, and for the first time ever, I feel like I might actually begin to slightly understand a little bit about VAT, which is very exciting for me.
Please do share. This could be the VAT episode.
Oh no, I don't understand that much. So that's good. But today's episode, we are both really super excited about. We recorded it quite a while ago now, but when we recorded it, we had really difficult technical issues, which if anybody who's a regular listener will be like, don't you have technical issues every episode? That's only when Helen and I are recording unassisted.
Yeah.
This time we had Ant, but the network was really dodgy. And so we haven't been sure we'd be able to use it. But Ant has done his work and we've restored it because the content is just amazing, because it features our very own Chris Turner.
Yeah.
Helen, who you know particularly well and is a massive fangirl, actually, if that doesn't sound a bit weird.
I know. I listened back when we were listening to see whether we could use the audio. I listened back to it and it really made me laugh, because the first time I speak, I'm very like, ooh, kind of, and I was just like, you can just tell I'm talking to somebody who I revere as like a hero. I was just really kind of, I don't really want to say anything, because I think that, you know, as psychologically safe as Chris makes you feel, you're in the presence of a great mind and great wisdom. So I sort of was a little bit hesitant to put my two penneth in. I just wanted to listen to him and absorb all of the wonderful things that he was saying. So yeah, it was a particularly enjoyable episode for me to have somebody so influential to my work on the podcast. So I can't wait to share it.
And if anybody meets Helen in person, ask her for the funny story that she tells about what she said to Chris Turner. But I will leave that for people to ask you in person, and let's
thanks for
that
Thanks.
Special moment.
Yeah.
But yes, without further ado, this episode is with the wonderful Chris Turner, who, well, let's let him introduce himself, but really is all about Civility Saves Lives. So enjoy and join us at the end, where we come back together and share our thoughts.
Enjoy.
Welcome to How to Thrive. We're joined today by Chris Turner, who is super exciting because he is neither a vet or in the veterinary profession or a lawyer or in the legal profession. He is, in fact, in the medical profession, which is both refreshing and exciting. So, Chris, welcome to the How to Thrive podcast.
Thank you, Claire. It's absolutely lovely to be here. I've got to say, when you start off by saying he's neither a vet nor a lawyer, and you're thinking you might get something really exciting, and instead what you get is a bloody doctor.
No, I think it's exciting. I mean, for most lawyers listening, they were probably faced with this question by their careers service. I certainly was like, do you want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an accountant? And that was pretty much as broad as exciting as it got. And so I've always been excited in the medical profession. But so really excited to talk to you. And Helen is here too. Do you want to say hi, Helen?
Hello, it's lovely to be here. And I'm very excited as well to be recording this with Chris. Obviously, Chris has been a guiding influence in everything that I've done so far as well with Civility. So I'm looking forward to bringing this to the legal space as well.
So, Chris, we start all of our podcasts by asking our guests what brought them to where they are now, in terms of their career journey, in terms of their kind of personal journey as well, to kind of understand a bit about what drives you and what's where your experience has been. So what's brought you to where you are now?
I studied in Edinburgh and eventually ended up in England, and I did my training in emergency medicine in the West Midlands. And in one of the great career moves of all time, I chose to have as my first consultant job mid-staffs. Now, for those that don't remember, mid-staffs is one of those NHS disasters. And basically, I became the clinical lead and new consultant in the emergency department in between the end of a report done by the Healthcare Commission and the publication of that report. And it meant that I was basically in the eye of the storm when the report came out, and it was front page of all the newspapers and top story in the BBC website. And I worked there for a couple of years afterwards, was interviewed for the various Francis inquiries around this, and it really took a toll. One of the things that we did in that time is we worked on our governance structure, because our governance structure had been very poor. And we worked on our governance structure, and we started looking at how we could be better, and we really developed it. But eventually I and many of the people around me broke. We had been under the cosh for a number of years, and it's a really difficult environment to work in. I was, this is a true story, I was literally called a murderer in complaints meetings, and that's really difficult to deal with when your whole purpose is the polar opposite of that. And eventually, it just wore people down. And I had a breakdown and ended up going to work in another place prior to ending up in Coventry. But one of the big things that we'd done at mid-staffs, was start to move the culture in our governance department from one of retribution, where we were blame and punishment focused, to something that was a bit broader. We probably weren't restorative at that time. The language wasn't there to call it restorative, but we were certainly beginning to look at the bigger picture of why things had gone wrong. And then when I got to Coventry, where I work now, and I've been working for the last 12 and a half years, when I got to Coventry, we really worked hard at creating a restorative, just culture within the context of the emergency department, where we moved away from blame and retribution and towards understanding what had gone wrong within the system. As part of that, I was doing a lot of reading, and I came across the work of Christine Porath. And Christine Porath, more than anybody else, changed the way that I think about how we do governance. And what she had been doing, she was at Georgetown, but she's just recently moved. What she'd been doing, she'd been looking at the impact of behaviour on performance and cognition of the recipients and witnesses to that. And it kind of blew my mind. And I thought, this is amazing stuff. So I thought, do you know what? I'll give a talk on it. I'll give it one talk. I wrote it with Joe Farmer, who's the guy I started Civility Saves Lives with. And in a rather grandiose moment, we gave it a name. We called it Civility Saves Lives. And we quite deliberately called it that. We didn't want to call it, don't be a dick, which is the obvious thing that people tend to go for. We didn't want to call it Don't Be a Dick because we knew people didn't come to work to be dicks. We thought we need something that people are going to listen to. So we called it Civility Saves Lives because civility is the word that is used in the academic research about treating people respectfully, basically. And I went and gave this talk and I thought, that's fine. And then somebody asked me to give another talk after that on the same topic. And I went, okay, I've done that. Did a couple. Then I got more and more and more invitations to talk. Then I did a couple of TED Talks. The one that you can see online is TEDx Exeter. And then people started asking me to talk all around the world. And it's reached this stage where I do get to travel the world and talk about the impact of behaviour on performance. And that's how we got to where we've got to. But I mean, Civility Saves Lives itself is a very loose group of people who are interested in the impact of behaviour on performance. And in no way do I control it. It's literally, it's there for anybody to use in any way, shape or form that they see fit. And it's run completely on trust. And people use it commercially, and that's totally cool. I'm all right with that. But it's just ballooned, and it's used in, I think, 4-5 continents now.
Wow. So just for the benefit of people who haven't had read or come across the research that was done by Christine Porath, it's certainly something that Helen and I have spoken about, and I find it really helpful because I think one thing that the legal industry likes is data and numbers, and they like to understand, what impact is this actually having on my business, or is it just nice to have? Maybe you could can you just summarize summarize this massive piece of research, but give us the headlines.
Okay, listen, I can do that. So basically the bottom line to this is that we tend to believe that when we feel that we are diminished in an interaction with somebody else, that's our fault, and that we have somehow or other, we're not strong enough. And it turns out that the data is overwhelmingly that's not the case. That when I treat somebody else in a way that leaves them feeling disrespected, often in a really liminal way, so that they're not sure if it's deliberate or not. All they know is that they don't like it. So I'm not talking about screaming and shouting at people here. I'm talking about the tutting, the eye rolling, the dismissive, undercutting comment, that you're never quite sure if somebody's deliberately trying to hurt you, but it doesn't feel okay. That actually has a measurable impact on people's cognition. And it turns out that for the recipient, it's about a 61% reduction in their cognitive ability in the moment, and that lasts for varying periods of time. If you just witness it, it's about a 20% reduction in your cognitive ability. And probably, and this is much harder to study, that if I am the person dishing out incivility, particularly if I lose my rag, that's extreme. I am probably not functioning so well myself either, but that's really hard to look at in terms of the science of it. In terms of the mechanism, what's happening? Well, probably incivility is the thin end of the wedge of threat. So at the thick end of the wedge of threat, you've got somebody standing in front of you with their fist cocked back, and you are having your fight or flight response. And everybody gets that means that you're sending your cognitive and physical resources in a different direction. The thin end of it is people who treat us in a way that feels a wee bit disrespectful, but as I said, in a liminal sense, you're not quite sure what's going on there. And what's happening at that thin end of the wedge is that we're already beginning to divert physiological and psychological resource away from being able to think clearly and towards how we're going to deal with a potentially threatening situation. And this stuff is, it's hardwired into us. We have evolved into this. And that's what I get. I get the chance to go and talk to people about. It's rather lovely.
So essentially it's by saying that when you witness incivility, it's not only affecting your own personal well-being, but it's affecting your ability to perform to your maximum.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting. And I mean, Helen, you've done a lot of work in this space as well, but in the impact within the veterinary sector.
Yeah. And we've kind of collaborated with the University of Aberdeen to really start to explore what it means in the veterinary space. Essentially, what Chris has just described is exactly what we're finding. It is hugely impactful on people and their ability to be well and work in the best way possible. There's a lot more. We're a long way behind the work that's been done in other fields, but it's really, really important. But I think whilst it's called Civility Saves Lives, it's not just about saving lives. It's about the fact that, it's important that we sort of treat each other with the respect we should, so that everybody can work to their best ability and nobody goes home considering what's been going on at work and kind of burnt out and fed up. So it's I don't know whether this kind of leads on to the idea of the pool of wisdom, Chris, and the fact that, when we feel that we're being treated with a lack of respect, when we feel that there's incivility directed in our way, we don't want to contribute. And that's a massive side effect of this whole thing as well. So, but I'll let Chris explain that because he does it so much more eloquently than I could ever.
Yeah, so there's all sorts of things that sort of tie together here. And one of them is that we all want to be wise. We want to make wise decisions. And we have a problem within our education system. I'm talking here about doctors. And basically, doctors are measured, our exams are all on what we know. It's all what's going on between my ears. And what we end up doing is producing lots and lots of exam ninjas. Lots of people who are absolutely brilliant at going into an exam and answering questions that generally have one right answer and a myriad of wrong answers. And these guys are brilliant at putting lots of information in their head and then synthesizing answers. And some of them are like Sherlock Holmes. They are bloody magnificent at doing that stuff. And we really invest heavily in ourselves and all that personal mastery of being able to work it out for ourselves. But the truth is that in most situations, most clinical situations, we have to work with other people. And other people know things that we don't know. And this is really counterintuitive, but the single most important factor determining how well teams seem to work together is how much information do they share. When teams share more information, they make better decisions. And probably that's because if you're the leader of a team, everyone can see things you can't see. When people share that information with me as the leader, so if I'm running a trauma team, so I work in a major trauma centre, if I'm running a trauma team and people know stuff and they don't tell me, if I don't hear about it, then I cannot take it into account when I'm making a decision. So it becomes about having the right information to synthesize the best next step from. And in fact, that the amount of information that we share with each other is responsible for 40 to 60% of the variance of performance of teams in clinical situations. So these are teams, complicated or complex teams, where we have to work with other people. You can't just do it all yourself. You're part of a team. And that's kind of mind-blowing because in healthcare, we really don't spend time educating people around this. We spend a lot of time saying, you have to be personally brilliant. You have to be the best. Anything less than the best, there's a lifetime of misery for you ahead. And actually, where we get results is not in me being the best, it's in us as a team being the best team. And that's underpinned by this need to share information. And the way to think about this is this model called the pool of information. And the pool of information goes like this. There's an empty swimming pool. This represents a complicated or complex situation, something that you can't just get the answer to yourself. You have to work with other people. And as you walk up to this empty swimming pool, some water appears in the bottom. That's what you've brought to the party. That's what I've brought to the party. That bit of water in the bottom of the pool, and we can make our decision based on that. But if we can get more water into the pool, more information into this pool of information, then we have a chance of making better decisions. So we can invite people to stand around and potentially contribute around the pool of information. And we can invite people who look like us, sound like us, think like us. I could invite a bunch of squat, beardy, middle-aged Scottish men to stand around the pool of information, and they will contribute, and we will talk about the things that are important to us. So if they're of my vintage, we'll probably talk about early 1980s new wave of British heavy metal music, which is obviously very, very important. And we're also obviously going to talk about the fact that Scotland have just beaten England 4 times on the trot in the Calcutta Cup, because this is stuff that's important to us. The problem with getting people who look like you, sound like you, think like you to stand around the pool of information is you get the same information over and over and over again. So there becomes an argument for having people to stand around this pool of information who represent difference, who don't see the world through the same lens as I do, who see it differently. And it's obvious in equality and diversity argument. You get people who are different sex, sexuality, race, religion, get them to stand around the pool of information. But that's not enough for a couple of reasons. The first one is this. If you get a bunch of vets or lawyers or doctors to stand around the pool of information, we might look like the United Colours of Benetton. But being a vet or a lawyer or a doctor makes you think in a specific way. And it's actually more powerful than your cultural background a lot of the time. So you can have people who look like equality and diversity who aren't really equality and diversity. They're basically clones of each other. So we have to get people who represent different perspectives, different jobs, different people who work within the same system. And in my system, that would include patients, obviously an awful lot of the time, and relatives. But just having these people standing around the pool of information is the illusion of equality, diversity and inclusivity, because there's equality and diversity there, but there's no inclusivity. And the reason for that is that every single person standing around the pool of information has their own tap, and they will choose to turn on the flow of information and they will choose to turn it off. And the single most important factor determining whether people will choose to turn on the flow of information is, do I feel valued and respected around here? And that is underpinned, certainly when we first meet people, by civility. When people treat us in a way that feels civil, then we tend to turn on the flow of information. Now, if I'm the leader of this team and I get the guys in the team to turn on the flow of information, what happens is I now have this information that I can use to synthesize the best course of action going forward. And it's really all about producing environments where people feel able to speak, feel able to share, and where that then facilitates the people at the top to perform as well as they possibly can, because they have information that allows them to make the best decisions.
It's interesting you were saying that, particularly from a medical perspective, people are, junior doctors through their training are taught that, they are the ones and it's all about their knowledge. And actually, that really resonates from a legal perspective. And I think there's this kind of feeling that you've got to have all the answers, and you're being, you're employed and you're a professional and it's all on you.
But I mean, we lawyers also have this great benefit of they're slightly detached, either for good or for bad, from reality. Their high pressure situations tend to be, unless you work in kind of like a people first role, like a families lawyer or a criminal lawyer potentially. A lot of the time, it's the commercial world. And so kind of you probably have a bit more time or a bit more space to consider civility. But I suppose within the medical world, it is incredibly high pressured, especially I suspect within a trauma unit. And I guess it's very easy for the first thing to be lost, is potentially the most important thing as we're discussing now. It is that civility piece. So how do you instill the civility practically within the team you work with, and kind of help them to recognize that actually it is in the most high pressure situations where they need to be aware of it and they need to really nurture it?
So the starting point in this is when we start to talk about this, it becomes real and people see value in it. And we know that just talking about the impact that behavior has on performance is enough to drive a change in behavior in some people. Those are usually people who are insightful and who get that their behavior is possibly resulting in other people not performing at their best. So there's a recognition of that so that we become mindful of it in our practice with other people. The other thing one of the other things is recognizing that when we're stressed, bits of us fall apart. So fall away. So if we're reaching the limit of the stress that we can tolerate, there's a couple of things happen. The first thing is that if I'm not able to tolerate much more stress, I tend to be a bit snappier with people. I tend to drop the pleases, the thank yous. I tend to be more direct, less warm. That's something that happens to many of us. But the other thing that happens is that when I get given information, I am more inclined to hear that information as carrying threat. And I'm more inclined to respond by snapping back at it. And I think many people who are listening to this will recognize scenarios where they have gone into a conversation with people really pure of heart, with just good intention. They've gone in, they've tried to have a conversation, and the other person has bit their head off. And the reason for that is the other person is so primed to see threat at that point. Even when we're trying to be the nicest version of what we think they need, they can't see that and they will push back. So a recognition of the importance of sort of managing ourselves, because we never really got taught about managing ourselves at uni. I never remember anybody talking about this. We became, rose up through the ranks. You become the boss, and it's almost like that's the right to behave as you like, rather than understanding that you are so massively influential in the ability of other people to perform. In fact, what the evidence says around this is that the single most important person determining your well-being and engagement at work is your immediate line manager, your boss. When your boss is engaged, you tend to be more engaged. When your boss isn't engaged, or when your boss is actively disengaged, you tend to be more likely to be disengaged at work, and your well-being tends to suffer as well. And one of the things that we do is we try and impress upon people just how important they are, because it can be really difficult when you've been in a job for a long time and perhaps you feel maybe you're a wee bit burnt out. Maybe you don't feel that anyone listens to you. The truth is people are listening to you. And one of the things we do with folk is talk to them about how important they are, which is a really kind of counterintuitive conversation about how important somebody who's very senior is. But what happens is a lot of very senior people are really frustrated, don't feel that they're important, don't feel that they're seen, and then they kind of act out and behave in negative ways. And it's really helpful to understand the impact that behaviour has on us the impact that our stress levels have on our own behaviour, but also the importance of who we are to the people around us. And that stuff is shown to help people to choose to behave in a different way.
And I guess as well, I mean, for the person who's maybe the recipient or receiving the incivility, the understanding that, these people are probably under a huge amount of stress themselves, and whilst it doesn't make it right, coming in with the empathy of, this potentially isn't all aimed at me, it's not a personal, attack on me. I mean, that's probably a very hard thing to do, but equally is an important almost defense mechanism.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of interesting work done around this. In fact, there's 30 years of work done with nurses, which the work is all orientated around how do you cope as a nurse when you are in the firing line of either a senior nurse or a senior doctor. How can you put your shields up? And pretty much 30 years of research on this all comes to the same conclusion. You can't. It doesn't work. It's actually the wrong side of the equation to be looking at. When we look at the side of the equation, we say, how do I defend myself? And we all want to be able to do that because we want that kind of personal mastery of controlling our own world and our own emotions. When we try and learn how to do that, it just doesn't work for any prolonged period of time. And it certainly doesn't work when we're blindsided by something that just happens to us and we don't have time to put our shield up. So it turns out that the most effective intervention that we can have around this stuff is not teaching people to cope with crap. It's trying to stop the crap from flowing downhill towards them in the first place. And what happens when you start to talk to people in senior leadership positions about this is if it resonates with them, they take it on board, and many of them choose to change. There's a pediatrician, community pediatrician called Anna Baverstock in Somerset. They did a piece of work in maternity units. And over a year, they took the percentage of people in the maternity units who believed that behaviour mattered in a material, demonstrable way from 60% to 100%. And over the same period of time, the percentage of people who said that they saw uncivil behaviours in the preceding 2 to 4 weeks at work went from 70% down to 50%. And that feels hugely important, because one of the temptations that we've got is that when we see people who are behaving badly, we think they're deliberately doing it. And the evidence on that is they're not. They're not deliberately doing it most of the time. Sometimes people are. In fact, I can give you the percentage. It's 4% of people say that they deliberately throw their weight around at work because they're the boss and they can do it. Now, there may be some other people who also do it and aren't prepared to admit to it, but 4%, most of the time people are trying to do the right thing. People are trying to treat other people well. And a lot of the negative leadership behaviours that we see, the dominance, the aggression, I think people do that because that was what was role modelled to us. Certainly, you growing up in Edinburgh or going to medical school in Edinburgh, that's kind of arrogance, the kind of rumple of the Bailey kind of stuff. That was what my consultants were like, or at least that's what they seemed like to me. They probably weren't like that in real life, but that was what I saw. And I think a lot of my colleagues, we moved through the system and we thought that's what leadership looked like.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think that's, it actually goes back for me to that, your pool of wisdom, concept as well, because I think when you just look within, say, the legal profession, or you just look within kind of the medical profession, you say, well, this is how it's done. This is how it's always been done. Senior partners have always been this daunting figure, and a bit like going to see your headmaster of a really antiquated style school, always be on your, your best behavior. And actually, if you look broader, if you always look within the profession, that's what the answer you're always going to see. But if you kind of increase the breadth of that discussion and you invite more people into it, you get a more diverse range of people, then you'll see that there are other ways. And I think when I sort of reflect on what you were saying about the impact that stress has, I have become more and more aware of it over, I suppose, the journey that I've been on over the past 12 to 18 months. And if I know that if something triggers me and I've responded in a certain way, it's very likely that there is more going on than meets the eye, and that actually the person who's receiving it is nothing really to do with them. It's to do with my own stress levels, something that's happened previously, anything like that. And it's and being aware of that and giving yourself, we talk a lot about giving yourself the space to adjust and react and take that breath and kind of reevaluate, I think is, so important.
And also accepting that you're going to screw up, because every single one of us screws this stuff up sometimes. And that when we do screw up, and sometimes we screw up and we treat other people in a way that we wouldn't want to treat them. Sometimes they perceive themselves as being treated that way. And we had no intention of that happening, and we didn't even remotely mean it like that. But what's really lovely about that as a situation is when we're aware of it, when we are aware that somebody else has felt disrespected by us, there's something we can do which not only restores the relationship, but actually the evidence is makes the relationship stronger. And that is apologizing. And it's a really interesting thing saying sorry, because some people just can't say sorry. And it's a massive leadership and workplace Achilles heel. Not being able to say sorry, always having to be right. Those guys deny themselves the opportunity to be seen as even better by the people around them. So if we screw up with folk and recognize it, because we're human and we mess up. And, there's nobody on this planet that we can't put under so much pressure that they don't turn into, a bit of an idiot. And that's the nicest way I could put it. I was going through a whole bunch of different expressions there. Ended up with a bit of an idiot. It's kind of soft. But we can all be there. What do you do when you're there? Well, you have to have a bit of self-compassion. You have to understand that this happens to everyone. And then saying sorry to make it up, and then going again and constantly trying to be a better version of ourselves.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful that, and it's something, again, that the legal profession is so bad at. We seem to be a breed of self-righteous fear of getting it wrong. And I think, what you were talking about at the beginning about just culture and kind of trying to remove this fear of mistake and blame, I think is so apt, because it's Helen and I have had some conversations over the past few weeks about blame within the legal profession, and whether actually trying to remove blame for some of the stuff that's happened recently, and actually it's more about kind of learning from it and accepting that we don't have all the answers, and accepting that we need to look for new solutions.
I think there's an issue here, is that we are taught that we have to be right. Being right becomes incredibly important. It's the same, and lawyers argue to be right, whereas we're just taught in medicine that we just have to be right. But that ends up as arguments. And we get into this situation where we mistake something. And it's this: we mistake being right for doing the right thing. We think that the endorphin hit of winning an argument is the same as having done the right thing. And one of the things that comes out of lots of this wisdom research is that if we want to do the right thing, we need to share information. We're back to talking about that again, but it's not about being wedded to my take at the very beginning. It's about looking at the situation, being prepared to adapt and compromise as we get more information on board. And this is such a big deal for doctors, is trying to teach them that it's not about being right. It's about collectively doing the right thing. And it's hard work getting people to get on board with that as a concept, particularly when they've got 20 plus years of an education system that says you have to be right, and you have to be right first time, and you have to defend yourself. And I think it's a point worth making, because it's a big deal for us.
I I think that's so similar to the veterinary industry as well, Chris. I think, we have this huge thing about being perfectionists and that you must know the right answer. There's no room for being wrong. But it's encouraging people to share that decision-making process, or at least talk about it with other people and ask them to come in and share their knowledge, share their thoughts, so that you're making the right decision for our patients. Because it's really the actions of one single person that actually contribute to fantastic care. We need everybody contributing to that equation, that pool of information, so that we can all, we make sure that they get great nursing care, great anaesthesia care, great, medical surgical care, whatever it is, and put it all together so that it joins up and it doesn't feel like it's just on one person's shoulder.
Yeah, I like this concept as well about collectively doing the right thing and how that impacts like the industry. So beyond the team, and kind of thinking about, even as an industry, we can get wedded to this idea of we have the answers, and actually we have this power as an industry to do the right thing. That if we all join together, I think that in the legal industry, certainly because it is corporate, and I know it's the same, to a large extent within the veterinary, no one wants to admit a mistake. No one wants to admit that they did something wrong, because it makes them feel like they're in a disadvantage against their competitors. Whereas actually, I think a lot of the problems that we see are systemic throughout the industry, and actually it's about collectively coming together and learning and kind of building, rather than any individual being right or wrong.
So it's such a big deal in human healthcare as well, because one of the issues is at an organisational level, sharing information. And something that happened when we moved towards foundation trusts, which are trusts which were financially separate from the overall system and had their own pot of money, and all trusts wanted to be one of those, is that trusts started guarding information. They didn't have a collective dialogue about things that were going wrong. And even in those trusts that weren't part of that foundation trust process, a lot of them were hiding the stuff that was going wrong, because the response of the system to something going wrong is frequently retributive. So the system then comes to punish the organisation that's got something wrong. And the problem with this is that the same mistakes were happening all over the country. They were happening time and time and time again, and people weren't able to learn from them because everyone was hiding them. And that this happens in healthcare around the world. And do not believe for a second anybody who says that they have a completely psychologically safe healthcare environment and we talk about everything and all the rest of it. That is a nonsense. But we can move towards a more psychologically safe environment. I'll give you an example of what happens when people start to drive towards this. There's a woman called Rebecca Miles, and she started the Cardiothoracic Safety Collaborative. That's not quite the right name, but she started about 25 years ago, getting people into a room who worked in cardiac surgery, thoracic surgery, and cardiology to talk about what happens when they're at work. And at the time, there was no system where these guys all got to speak to each other. And one day somebody presented a case, or rather she presented a case for somebody else. And afterwards, a couple of people came and spoke to her and said, "How did you know about that case?" And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "How did you know that happened in my hospital?" And it turned out that this same thing had happened in a number of different hospitals. They hadn't told each other. So the hospitals that had fixed it weren't in a position, they weren't able to tell other people what they'd done to fix it, because that would have been admitting that there had been a problem previously. And it was the culture was not psychologically safe enough for people to share and get learning. And of course, I mean, we all say we want a psychologically safe environment, but my goodness, if you work in an organisation that gets quite a few things wrong, then what happens is the eye of Sauron comes onto your organisation. You're under the microscope, and the people are lifting up stones left, right and centre, to totally mix my metaphors. And they're finding all this stuff that is wrong in your organisation. And organisations know full well that is a really bad place to be. So you end up in these cultures that don't share things that have gone wrong, and working out what the right way of doing this is actually very difficult.
Yeah, it's something that's really become even more prevalent since the corporatisation of the veterinary sector, is that people don't want to share information. They collect information on errors, and it all goes into separate buckets. And then, like you say, they don't want to because they don't want to give it away. It's like they're, what's going on and also what's going right. Sometimes they don't want to share because it might be, competitive edge. And it's just such a shame that people don't feel able to share this stuff, because let's face it, if somebody tells you that they've made a mistake in a particular way, then as soon as they've shared it with you, you're not going to do the same thing as they have already. And it can be really powerful.
Chris, we're coming towards the end of our time, and what we ask all of our guests as they are leaving us is to offer up kind of 3 top tips for thriving, and they can be from a personal perspective or from a career perspective, or both. So over to you. What would you put down as your 3 top tips for thriving?
So this is maybe a slightly long answer. My number 1 top tip is it's not all about you. It's not about what I can do for me. This guy called Tate Shanafelt, who looks at wellness at work, and if we're talking about thriving at work, he looks at our well-being at work, and he does it on massive data sets of doctors, and basically this is what it shows. The percentage of your well-being at work that is down to personal resilience is 20%. That's it. You could be the most resilient vet, doctor or lawyer on this planet. You still only get 20% of your total well-being at work. And you spell his name TAIT-SHANAFELT. Now, so what are the two other bits split into, broadly speaking, 40% each? One of them is what's called efficiencies of practice. And what those are the pebbles in your shoes. So the things that make doing a good job difficult. Because people don't get how important it is to do a good job to folk who go to work. When we go to work, we want to do a good job. If the system stops us from doing a good job, we get moral distress from that. And it can be all sorts of different things that stop us doing a good job. It can be the volume of work that's coming in. It can be the fact we don't have a bloody car park space. It's the stuff that stresses you and it stops you being the best version of yourself. So thinking about the efficiencies of practice, the pebbles in our shoes, but the other 40% is this. It's our culture of wellness. It's who I am to you, who you are to me. What is the meaning of why we come to work? And it's having shared meaning. It's having esprit de corps. And what this means is that for my ability to thrive at work is in 20% of that is my personal resilience. That's what I can do for me. All the yoga and mindfulness a man can take. But 40% of my well-being at work is what you do for me. And 40% of your well-being at work is what I do for you. And we forget that. Particularly when we're finding it difficult, we tend to disappear into ourselves and try and control ourselves, control our environment. And it's just rubbish. It's a rubbish way of dealing with this. And the way I think about this goes like this. It goes, me standing on my own in the middle of a field with my arms stretched out wide like a scarecrow. And I am being battered by the weather, which is everything work can chuck at me. I can work on myself, my personal resilience. I can work on my core strength. I can work on my shoulders. I can stand there for longer like that. But eventually I'm going to get blown over. Or I can put my hands out like this and I can have one hand on Helen's shoulder, one hand on Claire's shoulder. Helen and Claire are standing facing perpendicular to me. They've got their arms out. You've got your hands on other people's shoulders, and so on and so forth until we form a mesh. That's our culture of wellness. That's us supporting each other. And then the weather that comes and tries to batter us, that's the environment. That's our pebbles in our shoes at work. And we can address all of these things. So if we want to thrive in the workplace, it's about having a workplace that's responsive to what we need in order to be good. But it's also largely about who we are to each other and creating a set of behaviours between each other that allows other people to perform at their best. And then there's a wee bit about what we can work on for ourselves. I realise that's only one thing to take from this, but I think it's quite a big thing. It might be enough. For what it's worth, the other bits, being prepared to say sorry. And being prepared to say sorry, hugely, hugely powerful. Many of us really struggle with it. And understanding that behaviour has an impact on performance of the people around us. Our behaviour on them and theirs on us. And talking about it drives change.
Hello, welcome back. So that was Chris Turner and his just amazing knowledge and wisdom. And I could listen to him all for hours and hours and hours.
I could, and that's the problem.
Very
Sometimes
wise
you think,
man.
we're meant to be saying something. Wake up.
I think this will be taken out of the final edit, but there were certain moments in that I was like, Helen, are you there? And on some occasions she wasn't.
Yeah,
she had
well,
frozen.
there were some of the technical issues where I'd
and
frozen.
on some occasions, I think it
So
was
I was just so deep in listening that I was just observe. I can't say it. How do you say? Taking on every. I was like, I've lost a word there. Yeah, he was absolutely immense, and yeah.
So one of the things we talked to him about is a phrase that we've adopted, I suppose, borrowed, and we talk about a lot really throughout this podcast because it forms so much of the background, the rationale for why we do this podcast is about this pool of wisdom, and how we are stronger together. And the term pool of wisdom really came from a conversation you and I had with Chris, I think, and it may predate even that, that you may have had a conversation before that with him. But this concept of everybody feeding their information into a combined pool so that we can all draw on it, so that together we can be wiser. And then this concept of the taps and the psychological safety is I find that such a rich visual picture, and just perfectly summarizes, why we do the podcast, because we want to expose people to these different thoughts, but also actually why we are so intent on bringing together bringing people together for events or for group learning, and the power in that.
Exactly that. It's such an important concept, and one that I think, like you say, it's a powerful mental image of what we actually need to create as leaders. Regardless of the profession, we all need to be attending to and consistently and conscientiously bringing people forward to the pool of wisdom and really making sure they're turning on their taps so that we're sharing that wisdom, and then we can make collective good decisions, and understand each other's perspectives. So really, really important concept.
And I think one of the things I was thinking when I was listening back to it is actually what he was saying about, it's about getting different voices around the edge of the pool as well.
Yeah, I love that conversation.
And he was talking about, it's not just about, he's from the medical profession, obviously, and it's not just about getting doctors around the pool or consultants around the pool. It's about getting patients and relatives and everybody who's impacted around. And that did actually really plant some seeds of thought in my mind, which was actually, how do we make sure that it's not just the lawyers or the legal professionals, in my context anyway, who are within the pool of wisdom, but how do we bring on board everybody else? So whether it's the business services team that work with the lawyers, or the people that they touch across an organization, how do we make sure that we bring them into that arena as well? I think that's something that I want to go away and mull over, because I do think it's really important.
And this is something that's really a concept that's considered quite a lot at the moment within veterinary, and for good reason, I believe. And this idea of one team, in that, especially when we're working with, pets, we need the owners to be part of that team, because actually, whilst pets are in the hospital, in the veterinary clinic, perhaps we're looking after them and it's 100% on us. But when they go home, discharged back to their owners, their carers, their guardians, then we need to make sure that we're all working as one team to deliver the care consistently and in the right way, so that it's contextualised to the individual owner. So we're not asking them to do things that they can't do, and therefore influencing the patient's care. So it's really, really important that we get everybody round that pool of wisdom and listen to them, and make sure that we adapt and respond, so that everybody feels that they're on the journey together as one team, rather than silos and segments who perhaps don't talk to each other, don't share information, and then that ends up in performance being affected. Whatever performance looks like to you, whether it's legal outcomes, whether it's veterinary outcomes, whether it's healthcare, patient care, patient safety, all of those kind of things. It doesn't really matter. The idea is that we need one team, and to bring as many people to that pool, so that we get the best outcomes. And I think that's really important.
Absolutely. And I think, it applies so broadly. I was listening to it and thinking it applies both at team level, but also at this kind of professional level, at this greater level. Like, if we all, if we do all come together and we all share our successes and share our challenges, and and all contribute, how much more supportive, how much more successful might we all be? And not just that, but in a sustainable fashion as well. Like, we can all waste a huge amount of time and effort making the mistakes that other people have made before us. And actually, if we can learn from each other because people are contributing, then we're all much stronger for it. So
and build understanding and empathy, and yeah, I just think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And the research that he evidences or references right at the start with Christine Porath almost was, for me, was kind of the Kickstarter of me thinking this could actually be something in the legal industry, because the legal industry certainly loves its data. And I say this at the start, and when I read the stats, I was like, oh my God, this is why this is so important. And if you don't believe it on just a human level, then the data is very hard to ignore around the impact that it has on people and their performance. So really,
I think it just takes some understanding of how we translate it into different professions. So obviously within healthcare and veterinary healthcare, the outcome is that civility saves lives. And that's very clear to see the impact and importance of. Whereas, within professional services, the legal industry, perhaps civility might not save lives, but actually it does so much more than that. And the wisdom and sharing of wisdom is so greatly affected that that's going to really influence performance. So really important that, it would be really easy to discount it as inappropriate for other professions because the end user is not at risk of harm or death. But that simply isn't the case. It's really applicable to all industries, I believe.
Absolutely. I mean, maybe really crudely, you could have civility saves pennies for the finance team.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Civility saves time from resource management. And I was going to say civility saves people, because there is a huge well-being perspective in that as well.
Yeah.
Which actually probably brings us on to the other takeaway that I think we both had from Chris's session in particular. And that was when he referenced Tate Shannonfeld's work around, he was talking about his top 3 tips for thriving. And the first one is, it's not all about you, and then referenced Tate Shannonfeld, which I'd actually forgotten about until I re-listened to it. And now I've made massive note, highlighted it and stuck it everywhere, that I need to really dig into his work.
Yeah. And this idea of this matrix, right? Another really great visual model where we can really get into it. We can immediately see that one person on their own only has, we were talking about 20% resilience, and that's all the resilience we can ever have. But actually, if we build
and that's
a mesh,
on the best
a matrix,
day, right?
yeah,
That's
exactly,
the best day, yeah,
exactly. But if we build a mesh or a matrix and kind of create this culture of well-being, this culture, this workplace culture that's, fair and learning and all the rest of it, then actually we've got a chance of building the resilience of a mesh, something much tougher, much harder to damage. And then I loved reminded me of the pebbles in your shoe, which is a fantastic, I think it comes from, it's gone now, the What Matters to You work from the IHI, but the Institute of Healthcare Improvement. And the idea is that, looking at marginal gains and often people look at the boulders that we have. So you look at the problems that are really massive, but actually what are the things that wear us down day after day, the little inefficiencies in our system, the difficulties we've got that represent those kind of pebbles in our shoe, which are just a constant gnawing annoyance. So how do we tip those pebbles out of our shoes and how do we solve them? And that doesn't have to be a massive project. It can just be marginal gains, 1% at a time. And when we add them all together, then of course we get a massive improvement. So I think sometimes we feel that when a system has big problems, we have to address those first. But actually, it really reminded me about the concept of pebbles in your shoe, and that if we can start removing those pebbles, then we can start looking towards a more efficient sort of system as a whole.
And I loved when he was talking about, it could just be down to the fact you can't find a parking space.
Yeah.
Just it can be really, really simple. I mean, this really reminded me actually that one of the roles I worked in, the car park wasn't big enough. So we had to book car parking spaces, which was fine. I'm a very compliant person. So obviously I booked a car parking space every time I went in. And without fail, someone would be parked in it. And I'm sure they did that entirely, innocently and they were probably in a rush and all this kind of thing. But that was a massive pebble in my shoe. Like I'd drive into the car park, I couldn't park in my space. I would be like, right, well, I've booked it. What was the point? And I'd walk into the office feeling very incivil to everybody, only to find that actually the desk that I'd booked, someone was also sitting at. And it's those kind of pebbles and shoes that you can totally see that just automatically put you on a back foot. And actually don't need to be this major process overhaul. It can be the small things that really add, as you say, it's pebbles. It's not boulders, it's pebbles.
Yeah, so, small things that we can do and just make everybody kind of more efficient, reduce that potential for incivility. I have a recollection that you're also pregnant at this time, and I think on one occasion you were absolutely savage because I think the only space you could find was actually one that you then couldn't get out of the car in because you were so pregnant, and you were just like, "That's it. I think I'm going home now.
I'm leaving.
I'm never coming back." But it's interesting, isn't it? The small things that really can set you up well or not so well for a day. So I was really good reminders, and just like you, I could just listen to Chris for forever. In fact, we ought to get him on again just to soak up more of his wisdom.
Well, I think so if anybody wants to listen to his TED Talk, he mentions his TED Talk, which is really, really interesting
powerful.
And really powerful stuff. But yeah, really, really fascinating episode. And I'm so glad that we have managed to resurrect it. And I'm so glad that it is going out because it is, talking to Chris Turner is probably certainly one of my highlights and one of my favourites because I just find that he's so wise and also very generous with his time. Before this episode, when we first spoke to him, I think we were on the phone to him for like an hour and a half, and he's a phenomenally busy man. So yeah, really, really awesome episode. I'd love to know what people think, what people take away from it. But really resonated for us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris.
Just before we say goodbye, I'd like to take this opportunity to say a huge thank you to Flank, our sponsor for the How to Thrive podcast. Without their support, it would be much, much harder for us to share the wonderful learnings from our guests. So thank you so much, Flank. And if you'd like to find out more about how they can support your legal operations, please go to getflank.ai. If you enjoyed the podcast, please check out our website at www.being-human.co.uk to find out how we can support you and your team to thrive.